Thanks to all who are with us today. I'd like to call the meeting of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. You are attending the Behavioral Health Committee. Today is January 16th. We are meeting in hybrid, meaning that most of us here are on Zoom, but we also have a space in the Whatcom County Courthouse where people can attend. I do believe we have an attendee there. Is that Peter I see in the conference room? Welcome to you, Peter. Happy New Year, and anybody else that happens to be with you. Again, thank you for being here. Jill, can you scroll down for me just a little bit? Thank you so much. I am reading from your agenda, so I appreciate that. Before we begin our meeting today, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and, more importantly, connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort today to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment on your own to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here together today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. To go ahead and call our meeting to order, and if I can, I'm going to do a number 1A. And Dan, if you would, could you please introduce our new member to the rest of the folks? And maybe for the benefit of that person, we can go on around and introduce ourselves. Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike Parker. So Under Sheriff Harris, Mike Parker and I are the co-chairs of this subcommittee for the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, and then I'll call on the other members to go ahead and introduce themselves. Under Sheriff, go ahead.
Good morning. Nice to meet you all. I'm Steve Harris. I'm the Undersheriff with the Sheriff's Office. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for about 28 years in a couple different capacities, and I'm looking forward to offering whatever I can to contribute to this cause. Thanks.
Thank you, Undersheriff. I'm just going to go around on the screen as I see the people that are in the room here. Peter Frazier, do you want to go ahead? You're muted.
Hi, Steve. Good to see you.
Hi, Peter.
Congratulations on your new position. We know each other, but I'll just, for the record, say that I'm here as a concerned citizen and someone involved with incarceration, with criminal justice, and behavioral health. So,
thank you, Peter. Perry Mowry.
Good morning, Perry Mowry. I am a supervisor with the Response Systems Division that is part of the Health Department, recently renamed as the Health and Community Services. My responsibilities are predominantly around behavioral health components and special projects. So congratulations, Steve, on your new position, and welcome to the group.
Thanks,
Thank
Perry.
you. Appreciate it.
Mike Parker.
Yeah, and my apologies, guys. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Mike Parker. My day job, I'm a Housing and Healthcare Integration Manager at the Opportunity Council, and I'm honored to co-chair the Behavioral Health Subcommittee with Councilmember Dan Hamble. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brian Estes, who I see has popped on there.
Yes, hello. I'm Brian Estes, concerned citizen. I'm on the board of the National Alliance on Mental Illness for Whatcom County, and I also participate in NAMI Washington's public policy committee advocating for mental health. Welcome to the committee.
Thanks, Brian. Stephen Gockley.
Welcome, Under Sheriff Harris. Nice to have you joining, and appreciate your interest in this committee. My name is Stephen Gockley. I was original member of the task force and have been a co-chair for the last 5 years. I'm terming out in a matter of weeks, probably hang around in the shadows of the task force work, competency restoration, pretrial processes, tune into this committee periodically, but glad to have you participating in these conversations.
Thank you.
Mike Hilly.
Yeah, good morning. Good to meet you. Mike Hilly, the Whatcom County Emergency Medical Services Manager, and been part of this group for, I guess, almost 5 years. Mostly interested in behavioral health. aspects, especially for, diversion and opioid SUD use at the moment. So thank you and welcome to the committee.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Jenna?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna. I work in the Whatcom County Council office, and I support Jill with this committee.
Thanks, Jenna. Jill Nixon.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jill Nixon. I'm a legislative coordinator for the Whatcom County Council office and staff person for the task force.
Thanks, Jill. Heather Flaherty.
Good morning. My name is Heather Flaherty. I am here as a concerned citizen, but my day job is running the Chaconet Health Foundation. Happy New Year, everybody.
You too. Thanks, Heather. Courtney.
Hi, my name is Courtney Taylor. I'm a behavioral health specialist with the Whatcom County Public Defender's Office. And I've been on this committee for about, I think 2 years.
Thanks, Courtney. Did I miss anybody? It's hard for me to tell on my phone here.
Dan, I think it was pretty complete. I see Mike's got his hand up, but I think you got most of us.
Okay, Mike Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Before you get started, I do apologize. I have to leave at about 9:30 for a state meeting. I didn't want to, I don't know if you have any action items for the quorum today, but I do need to leave about 9:30. So sorry about that.
No, you're fine. I think we're information only today. I think we're good.
Mr. Gockley hasn't checked in yet and introduced himself.
No, I think we got to Stephen.
Oh, did you? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Wasn't paying attention, Stephen. Sorry.
We're good. We're good.
It was an unmemorable introduction,
That's not true. You're very memorable. Your volume though is pretty low. I don't know if you can fix that on your computer, but it was like that the last couple of meetings. So just a heads up. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over. I'm just briefly Dan Hamill, Bellingham City Council president, and welcome aboard, Undersheriff. Appreciate you being here today. Mike Parker, go ahead.
All right. Thank you all for letting us ad hoc that agenda item. We do want to kick it off and introduce. And Steve, it's no good to be in a meeting with a bunch of strangers. So we do welcome you. Thank you for being here. This group tends to tackle issues, right, of import both to your office, but also to behavioral health specialists throughout the county. So hopefully we'll get value from your perspective, and also you'll gain some value from some things that we cover here. So again, thank you for allowing us to go a little south with the agenda. I believe first up, we do have Perry Mowry. So Perry was pretty understated in his value to this committee. Perry brings an amazing amount of information, leadership, and we really appreciate his knowledge and forte. So Perry, you're first up on our agenda to fill us up on the latest of competency restoration. And for behavioral health committee members who are able to make it, this group is still meeting and pursuing this idea of what could we do in some way to bend the arc in a positive way of competency restoration and divert people who may be waiting for this type of evaluation. So Perry, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you again for being a presenter today.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Steve, I might mention that we do the Response Systems Division, as you may know, has quite a bit of interaction with the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office. We have a co-responder program and some other components. I'm sure you're, trying to put all that together. I'm a pretty good contact to reach out to. I can get you to the right person. I can research information and get it back to you. So email me if you need information and etc.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that we got 2 new co-responders on board, one of them being a former deputy. So it's great.
Indeed, we are very fortunate, and that's going to be an amazing addition. So John Dukes is a supervisor of the co-responder and alternative response team. He's a really great supervisor as well, so great communication. All right. Well, been asked to just talk a little bit about give an update and sort of a bit of history for folks that aren't aware of this. In regards to the Whatcom County Competency Restoration Work Group, this work group was pulled together, I want to say, right at the start of 2023. It might have been a little bit earlier than that. Councilmember Barry Buchanan and others stepped in and began to discuss this and decided to develop a work group to continue to discuss the issues that are challenging us relative to competency restoration and individuals remaining in the Whatcom County Jail due to a need for competency restoration and the challenges of the state. And I'll touch base on a little more detail of that. I'll ask for forgiveness in advance that I wrote some material up. There's quite a bit of information, and so I may have overdone it, but I'll try and go through this. Anybody that needs, me to stop or do additional details, and then I'll give a really recent update of what the group's been working on. This competency restoration work group is made up of judicial officers, the prosecutor's office, public defender's office. County council, as I'd mentioned, is represented, behavioral health subcommittee members, and concerned citizens that give great input and are involved in essentially discussions on a monthly basis. We meet on the third Friday of each month virtually and sort of, talk about some of the details that I'll share with you here. The purpose being that we've got a number of individuals with serious mental illness that are identified with needs of competency restoration that are incarcerated. I think most folks are aware of the fact that the state's really experienced some significant challenges in providing that competency restoration. So what ends up occurring is individuals remain incarcerated for extended periods of time, waiting for that service. And we want to be able to affect a change in that whole process. Essentially, the group has looked at three distinct options relative to addressing this, this challenge and ongoing process. The first option was really the prosecutor's office dropping low-level charges and individuals being released into the community. The challenge there, as I think most understand, is that there are limited resources within the community for supporting individuals with serious mental illness and that may be incapable or unwilling to engage in these limited services that are there. This increases the likelihood of additional law enforcement involvement, arrest, and recidivism. Another option that we're looking at and have discussed within the group is the sort of standard process of individuals being identified as having competency restoration needs, being referred to Western State Hospital. And as I had mentioned, there are extensive wait periods to receive those services. One of the other pieces that came up in our discussion from the jail chief, Wendy Jones, who's recently retired, was that individuals that do receive services through Western State Hospital are competency is restored. At that point, individuals are then transferred back to the Whatcom County Jail to stand trial now that they have received competency restoration and are able to understand their charges and assist in their own defense. But one of the challenges that comes up is that as the individual is returned to the Whatcom County Jail, they may at that point in time refuse medication, refuse the treatment recommendations that are there. That is, of course, their right. You cannot compel an individual in the Whatcom County Jail to take psychotropic medication or other medications. And so the individual can decompensate into, again, needing competency restoration. So that's another challenge that's occurred. Another option that we've taken a look at and spent the most time on in the competency restoration work group is development or consideration of development of a prosecutorial diversion program in Whatcom County. There are three existing, I'm going to call them PDPs because it's a mouthful. There are three existing PDPs in the state of Washington. They're located in King County, Spokane County, and Franklin-Benton County. And that gives us some framework, some context to take a look at and, understand, a number of components in these existing programs that have been in place for a period of time. These programs are funded through True Blood funding. Originally, as I understand it, the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services had available funding, and they sort of wanted to initiate this more local service, if you will, of supporting individuals with competency restoration needs in phases. And so King County, as I mentioned, Spokane and Franklin, Benton counties were sort of first in line to receive some funding for those services, establish those programs, develop that whole process and so forth. To my knowledge, that funding was limited. But in our work through the work group, we were able to make contact with representatives of the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services and found that there were possibilities of some funding for counties that were interested in establishing a prosecutorial diversion program. The challenges, in regard to this particular option of PDPs include, a lack of available funding just in general through the state. We also, as I think most folks are aware, have, behavioral health provider resource challenges, workforce, et cetera, particularly those for high need clients. That may or may not have requirements of remaining compliant in the community-based programs. We have a lack of supportive housing for individuals that have serious mental illness, and obviously individuals that are homeless and don't have those kinds of resources can be much more challenging in terms of providing ongoing and continuing services, depending on the situation. So those essentially, I'll mention another one as we kind of go along, but those essentially are the options that we've been looking at predominantly. As I mentioned, we did have quite a bit of interaction with a representative from the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services and identified that there were some options in terms of consideration of funding. The Office of Forensic Mental Health Services had a goal of submitting a budget request to the governor's office in late 2023 in December, or maybe even as far as January 2024 for establishing additional prosecutorial diversion programs. There's a number of counties that are interested in this besides that for Whatcom County. I'll get into a little bit of detail of where we went with that, but I'll also describe briefly the prosecutorial diversion program structure. The Office of Forensic Mental Health Services, through just experience in working with the existing programs in the state of Washington, really sort of put together a framework recommendation of staffing model and those kinds of pieces of what they believed needed to be in existence. And they provided this information to us and asked us to put together, or we offered to put together an annual estimated budget for providing these kinds of services within the community. We were doing that without necessarily, again, the workforce being in place and some of those other components, but said, well, okay, so what would this cost if we were going to implement this process and utilize a behavioral health provider in the community to do so? The Office of Mental Health Services has a goal of these programs serving 50 to 75 individuals per year, with a 6 to 12 month program duration, an estimate for an individual to get stabilized, engaged in services in the community, and sort of have that ongoing process. Although the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services has also said that they didn't specify a time frame. Individuals can stay longer. It's not mandatory that an individual is discharged from the program if there's particular issues that need to be addressed. The staffing model was essentially a 0.25 FTE director. The current programs have an administrator that that addresses those kinds of, you can imagine, components and so forth. One FTE program manager who is clinically credentialed, and then that position would also, beyond supervision and et cetera, carry a caseload historically in the other programs. 2 FTE case managers working in, obviously, supporting individuals in navigation through services, programs, getting them connected. Oftentimes, as some of the programs have described, their services These case managers will also do outreach. At times, individuals that are involved in the program will disengage. Again, as I mentioned, they're oftentimes homeless. So identifying those individuals and accessing them to re-engage them in the services is some of the role that they also play. Also, there is a certified peer support specialist, 1 FTE, and a prescriber. The prescriber FTE had varied to a certain extent, but obviously super important to have that component in the program services. And so that was a recommendation from the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services. So I'll stop there. I see, Mike, I don't want to jump in front of you, but I see that Courtney's got her hand up. So I'll stop there and then I'll give you guys the updates of what we've more recently been doing in the workshop.
Hey, Perry, just curious, you may have mentioned this and I missed it. Are those staff going to be dedicated to the program, or will they be allowed to be spread across other programs that the agency is operating as Jail Mental Health and Reentry operates now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And at least from the model now, the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services doesn't mandate that as much as they will say, you know, you need this staffing model to put in place. So obviously a 0.25 FTE director, for example, that individual would likely be working in other capacities in terms of behavioral health services within the community. The other individuals are full FTEs, and of those full FTEs, my understanding is they are dedicated to this program. A prescriber, obviously pretty expensive and as rare as hen's teeth, was what my father would say. And so that individual would be involved in other services and programs within the community. That answer the question, Courtney?
It does, and I'm sure you're already expecting this, but I just want to voice my concern about that, because we might be getting into another situation where, and I might be jumping the gun here, but we have that issue right now where we do not have dedicated folks. I will say things have shifted with reentry and they're more dedicated now to reentry tasks, but we really need dedicated staff. We need a dedicated prescriber. I know it's true. They are like your father said, very hard to find. That's part of the restoration backlog that we're seeing is not enough time with a prescriber that can see them in custody soon enough before they decompensate again when they get back from the hospital. Because another side note that I just want to add, since I'm on the mic anyway, is that a lot of people, actually a majority, when they get back to the jail, it's not that they're refusing medication. They're willing to take medication, but the problem is that Western gets them stabilized on medications that the jail will not provide, and then they get back to the jail, they withdraw very quickly, and then they're offered medications that they were not stabilized on. And I don't know about you, but I would have a hard time accepting that medication once my body and mind has adjusted to something else. So just want to offer that in us thinking about these programs. We need dedicated staff, and we need providers and facilities that are willing to facilitate conversations with clients that are involved in their care and are not actually outright refusing.
Yeah, it's a great point. And obviously, I suspect an array of reasons. One of the things that this medication challenge, comes up for individuals, certainly not limited to individuals refusing medication. One of the things that I can add is there's actually an interfund transfer between the health department, responsible obviously for the behavioral health fund, the 1%, 1/10 of 1% funding, that does pay for medication within the jail. As I think everybody is aware, the cost of medication has increased dramatically, and that's something that historically I worked very closely with Chief Jones, in that regard, and expect to work closely with Jail Chief Erickson as well, just in regards to medication and availability and that disconnect that ends up occurring there. So certainly appreciate the thought process and agree with you that that's absolutely an essential. That's a lot of resources, obviously oriented towards the individuals, and then a medication issue to cause the problem doesn't make a lot of sense. And so that's communication.
Harry, if you'd permit, just a kind of a piggyback question of Courtney. And Courtney, first of all, thank you again for bringing to light things that I just had not heard of being an issue. So, obviously, a shift in formulary between two entities is pretty crucial and makes a huge difference. So, thank you for bringing that up. And Perry, I'm just wondering, is there any help on the horizon? And of course, I think this committee would probably benefit from meeting the new chief of the jail to be able to talk about this and other things. We'd love to hear their perspective and kind of what their hopes are for what do they hope to maintain and what do they hope to bring improvement to. And I think the community would be really interested, but particularly along this line, is there any hope at all from any changes in Medicaid or from CMS changes that might help with how much that has been costing really the county, right, in one way, shape, or form, but it has been hitting the jail for medications. Can you light on that? Is there any change in 2024, or are we still stuck in the exact same place we've been?
We're a bit outside of my area of expertise, but I know that I have, heard continued legislative orientation towards this challenge of individuals that are incarcerated in the jail having their Medicare suspended. And that, being a challenge, we have a number of different steps that we take, specialists that can reinstate that quickly, communicate with the managed care organizations, those kinds of pieces. But if I recall correctly, there is some legislation around that, that there isn't a suspension, which would, if that occurred, would be huge because of the cost, obviously, that the jail, and that's where the push is, the cost being that it goes on the jail, as the jail is responsible for the individual's health and care at the time that they're incarcerated. And that includes, obviously the cost. I think that there are honestly some other legislative components to that could come to bear. And I'm sorry, I don't have that detail to be able to share that particular piece.
No worries. So, we might put a pin in that too for an update. Kayla Schapp-Bressler from the exec's office, who's been kind of our the pipeline of information for what our county's advocating for in this legislative session, changes in this regard really, is Kayla, and she will be presenting at the whole task force. Unable to join us this morning specifically, but she's going to be covering the same content. So I just want to highlight that if you have thoughts, if this is one of the many issues that we would like to take to the state, Kayla would be a great vessel to do so and will give us an update. And with that, I'll pause. Stephen, I saw your hand up.
Mike, I was just going to endorse Kayla as the best source of information and make sure we were having her rotate in here regularly while the session was still on. I know there are a couple of things there are plans in the state's waiver request to CMS to extend coverage in the jail from 30 to 90 days. The formulary issue, I don't know, is on the radar screen for many people. So it may be wise to flag that for Kayla and Representative Rule and some of the other people who could act quickly on putting some pressure on the healthcare authority and some budget provisions to support that.
Thank you for that, Stephen. And Perry, thank you for us for letting pepper you with questions in the middle of your presentation, but it's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And, one of the things, just as a sort of a side note, our name is going to escape me. We have a new director with the BHASO. And she's very dynamic and very knowledgeable and has worked, within the system to a certain extent. And, part of the discussions have certainly been about really bringing some pressure to bear on the managed care organizations for coverage, in terms of behavioral health care for individuals that are incarcerated, but just in general for individuals that are struggling specifically with behavioral health issues that may have a component of them being involved in the judicial system as well. It's not effective, as we know, for an individual's behavioral health to incarcerate them, in the pieces that we've ended up describing. And so there's also quite a bit of discussion around the managed care organizations, and our integrated care network is the reference taking a higher responsibility in terms of covering individuals and having that coverage. So there are a number of pieces. So with that, description of sort of the prosecutorial diversion programs, the different options that this competency restoration work group has pursued and discussed in our monthly meetings, I'll give a brief update of sort of what more recently has happened. I made reference to it a little bit, but just to sort of wrap up that detail. In November 2023, the competency restoration work group, through work with the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services, submitted a draft budget to the OFMHS and for the implementation of a prosecutorial diversion program. It wasn't a commitment. We're not at that place of saying we want to do this, we're going to make this commitment, et cetera. But what we wanted to do was to respond to the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services because, again, as I mentioned, they were submitting a proposal to the governor's office for additional funding, specifically for additional prosecutorial diversion programs, in addition to some other funding for other concerns. So again, just wanted to clarify that wasn't a commitment on our part as much as saying, well, we are certainly interested. We want to submit an estimated budget. We did so in November. And my understanding in more recent communication with the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services is that how did they put it? That the budget request that they submitted to the governor's office had not moved forward in legislation at this time, although they were looking at also pursuing proviso dollars. So, again, working more directly with legislators and so forth for proviso dollars for the same thing. Don't have any further update just in regards to Office of Forensic Mental Health Services activity on that level, but obviously it's early on. In our December meeting of the Competency Restoration Work Group, we were also invited to attend the quarterly meetings that the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services holds with the existing prosecutorial diversion programs. I found that really helpful. I'm an old clinician at heart, and so I'm always interested in programs and what are the challenges, what's the reality of providing these services and et cetera. What are you running into? What are the the challenges that that you face? And so many of the existing providers checked in. They gave updates as they normally do in their quarterly meeting with the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services that holds the contracts, that the pass-through dollars, if you will, for these providers. So they provided updates, talked about challenges that they are experiencing, that sort of thing, and allowed some time for us to ask questions and that sort of thing. Stephen attended, so did Judge Grockmall, obviously myself, and I can't remember, maybe there were others here. Dan, maybe you were in attendance at that meeting as well. But I found it enlightening, and actually wrote down names because follow-up phone calls and that sort of thing I think can be helpful. And that's, just that does fall into my area of expertise, and so can gather more information that's more of a private phone call as opposed to a Zoom meeting, that sort of thing. Many of the challenges that were shared during it were the kinds of things that we had touched base on here, as well. Available behavioral health providers in the community to provide services for high need clients, clients agreeing to engage in prosecutorial diversion programs prior to their release, and then disengaging from the services following their release, which again could be any number of dynamics that are occurring there, including homelessness and and other challenges. And they talked some about the time that is actually spent in going out and attempting to re-engage with the individuals, make contact with them, make sure that medication is being provided, and et cetera. And so that was a particular area of interest, that it's like, okay, if you have staff that are out there, trying to find individuals and so forth, that can be, pretty time consuming and et cetera. And obviously the individual needs that support. We have discussed, and this is just sort of a side note, that the programs, it's interesting when I ask this question, there's almost, I feel like, some hesitancy to be as transparent as I'd like. That the programs are not contingent. If the individual is released on a low-level charge that has been identified as needing competency restoration but can't access those resources, and the prosecutor's office determines that it's like, all right, we're going to drop these charges and refer the individual to a prosecutorial diversion program. It's not contingent on the individual entering the program and being successful per se. And again, I'm not advocating for one way or the other, but I think that that is a discussion to continue to have with, well, okay, we have no ability to re-engage the individual per se if in fact they have disengaged for one reason or another. Although some of the programs, and I found this interesting, said if we are unable to re-engage an individual for one reason or another, if they discontinue receiving the services, we report that information back to the prosecutor's office. Again, that's kind of a double message to me, that it's like, well, okay, if the prosecutor's office dropped the charges and referred the individual to a prosecutorial diversion program, why report that information back to the prosecutor's office, I guess, other than data, and I can certainly understand that. But so I just wanted to clarify that particular piece. Our January meeting is coming up, as I mentioned, on the third Friday that we're going to meet, and we'll discuss information gathered in our quarterly meeting. The funding request being that it's not moving forward, the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services funding request with the governor not moving forward in the current legislative cycle, and the options that remain in terms of the proviso funding, as I mentioned, and then specifics of Office of Forensic Mental Health Services performance-based contract. I found that interesting as well, that the contract, and we did receive a redacted copy of the contract. So that will be part of our discussion to dive in a little bit more to the statement of work, the expectations, the requirements, and working with the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services. I'll jump to you here in just a second, Peter. I wanted to mention also that another interesting component of the restoration work group's discussions, it was actually Judge Grockmal, a Superior Court judge, that brought the concept and idea of guardianship conservators to support individuals in need of competency restoration when the services are unavailable. And I won't go into great detail about this because I don't know that I fully understand it, but essentially the court can appoint a guardianship conservator for individuals that have financial needs and et cetera. So another avenue, if you will, to bring support to the individual, to navigate the individual through, to bring some funding resources that, I'm understanding correctly, come through actually the court system. And so again, another, I think, viable option, and I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, if you will, but that was another topic that we discussed. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it back over to you, Mike, and you can.
Great, Perry. Thanks for that. I have a couple questions too, but I'm going to table mine. Peter's been patient. So Peter first, and then Courtney, please, with your questions.
Perry, thanks for that. Very interesting. You said that a decision has not been made to move forward with PDP. Who is making that decision at the county? What does that look like? And of course, my concern is if this is a program that we feel would be beneficial here in Whatcom County, that we don't lose any time and opportunity with the session going to receive funding and thumbs up. So who's making the decision and when?
Yes, great questions, Peter. And so, world according to Perry here, and there are other members. So, I encourage you to certainly jump in if I'm sort of missing some key points here. I actually brought that question up, given that this is a work group, obviously some, individuals, including county council, that are represented there, and said, listen, where do we go here? And, what are our next steps? Certainly, of course, bringing in information in detail. And I think that we're collecting and gathering enough data and information to make a more informed decision. And in our last meeting, I think it was Stephen, honestly, and maybe Barry Buchanan that said, yes, we need to really formalize this a bit and take this to those groups and entities that would be making that decision. We didn't specify in my recollection at this point, but it's like, all right, how do we now, as we've gathered this additional data and can make an informed decision, move this process forward? And what would those steps be? So apologize, they weren't, it wasn't specified necessarily, but, of course, my guess was in terms of Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force and the County Council, being those considerations of who does make that decision. So that's my understanding of it at this point. And sorry, Peter, I lost your second question.
That was helpful. It was a matter of timing. There's like the session is already, we're 2 weeks in. It sounded like it might be important for funding this, that it happened during the session. Maybe I'm wrong about, maybe I misunderstood that, but always just want to move these things forward as quickly as possible if it's something that we want. I hate to wait another.
Right. Absolutely. No. And so thank you for that. So what I will say to that, again, from my perspective, and that's pretty limited, to be honest. I mean, I really look to, the other members of the work group and, certainly other leaders in the community. Some of the challenges were just now, in my opinion, coming out of that workforce challenge and our behavioral health providers in the community being capable of actually stepping in and providing the services. So that's one of the factors that I think still remains to be determined of what is the temperature of our behavioral health providers at this point in time to be willing to accept a contract of this nature and, the responsibilities as I had described that. Oftentimes, these behavioral health providers are actually working with many of the individuals that we're talking about, but formalizing that and receiving funding, and those kinds of pieces. So I think that there's a bit more information to gather there. That is reaching out and communicating with the behavioral health providers, specifically themselves. That will be, a really important component. The other thing, as we talked with the representative of the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services, was that they were indicating, and I suspect whether, depending on where the funding is going to come from, the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services is interested in moving forward and supporting services and programs of the nature that we've been talking about in an ongoing way. Sustainable funding, always a question, always the challenge and issue. The representative that I've been working with in the OFMHS has indicated that there is available funding, or what they want to do is make funding available in 2024 as well as 2025. I'm not suggesting putting it off, but at the same time, sometimes the thought process is, well, great, let's go ahead and implement it. And then it's like, well, how come it hasn't started? How come it hasn't started? And that, ties back into, do we actually have the workforce to be able to have a formal program of this nature, et cetera. So starting early with the risk of not being able to sustain it from a workforce standpoint, or waiting for a period of time and, ensuring that implementation would be a bit more grounded. And again, I'm not arguing the point as much as saying I think if these are the factors that at least for me, it's like, well, this is what keeps me awake at night. How will we, be able to do this, and finding some more information. I facilitate a meeting every other month with our behavioral health providers, just informational and a lot of presentation. We refer to it as the behavioral health and crisis services meeting. I'm actually facilitating that meeting today. It happens to fall today, and wanted to bring the topic up so that individuals would reach out to me. We've got some pretty good communication between administrators and those kinds of folks of the program, and so can get a little bit more input and or even obviously pull together another meeting because I have that distribution list. So those are a couple of the components that that I'm taking a look at that. So hopefully I answered your question.
Thank you. That was really good. I appreciate the context and the insight into the work behind making the decision and making sure we have what's in place to move forward.
Great, thanks for that answer. Go ahead and go to Courtney. Thanks for waiting, Courtney.
I just have a comment for context, just to add to what Perry has said, and then I also had a question for Perry. So the comment was just, you know, in all this planning and looking forward that we're doing to, you know, to always, I really hope that we see investment in the PDPs, because we do not want to reinvent the wheel and just expand the restoration system and their influence in these people's lives. The goal is to get them diverted, get them out of the system, diverted to what that, you know, bleeds into the conversation that we've been having about housing and the lack of providers and where are we diverting people to, because we don't want them to be in the system. I really hope that in all these conversations, we continue to circle back to those PDPs, because we can't, people do not need to be caught in this system, especially for these low level offenses. In terms of talking about what keeps you up at night, what keeps me up at night is knowing that we have clients that have been in the system for years for stealing food, a blanket to survive outside, things that should not be happening. They should not be stuck in this system for as long as they have been, and they should be diverted out of it. So that's just a soapbox comment. And then my question for Perry is Whatcom no longer on the list for getting forensic navigators? Because the comment that you made about Judge Grockmall and the guardian ad litems, I'm just wondering how that would work if we get forensic navigators, because the other jurisdictions and True Blood regions have FNs. Whatcom was on the list to get them. I don't know if they still are, but if we do get them, that would be an officer of the court that is then pretty much charged with following that person until they're through the restoration process.
Yeah, a great question. And honestly, one that I don't know that I can accurately answer. My understanding, and I know that this is true, that each of the counties that I described that have prosecutorial diversion programs do also have forensic navigators that act as a liaison between those programs and the court system, and you know, obviously take some very important steps and components in that regard. As a matter of fact, I know that one of the programs that I actually talked with the manager, the program manager there, said that they were absolutely essential if an individual did, for one reason or another, disengage from the program. That they worked with the court, worked with the individual to re-engage the person. But again, one of my concerns programmatically was, well, okay, most folks here may not necessarily, or the bulk of folks may not, you know, understand that oftentimes the behavioral health providers that are in our community don't have a whole lot of interaction with the court system. They don't go and present in court in terms of cases or compliance or non-compliance or those sorts of things. And so there really isn't a professional that can communicate that information back and forth to the court and has that kind of responsibility and latitude. And so I was unaware of the fact that Whatcom County was in line for forensic navigators beyond the information and processes that I've been involved in relative to the prosecutorial diversion program, the competency restoration work group. So that is not something that I know detail about. But again, I think that was a component of counties having a prosecutorial diversion program, but not necessarily limited to that. There may be other counties that absolutely have that and don't have a PDP in place at this point in time.
Perry, if I could just add a little bit to that. Courtney, I think it's important how we use our terminology. Forensic navigator is a term of art, and it was assigned to the first tier of true blood implementation jurisdictions to supplement that process. I think what Perry described with the PDP programs were case managers serving a similar kind of function, but as he said, they're not forensic in the sense that they have engagement with or particular knowledge of the court process. So they weren't really forensic navigators as the legislature designated them. They were trying to fill the gap for that. In terms of Whatcom County being on the list for forensic navigators, that would only be the list of true blood implementation. And we are way down the list for true blood implementation years and years out, if ever, given what we're seeing over the past few years. So the PDPs are an alternative to that. And the navigation assistance that you're advocating for is absolutely essential, but it's not really forensic navigators, and that would have to be a whole separate appropriation and authorization coming with PDPs because it's tied to true blood right now.
Okay, thank you for, yeah, I'm referencing the DSHS employees, not case managers. I'm talking about, because Spokane has them, Pierce has them, Great Lakes has them. Yeah, and Whatcom's at the bottom of the list for true blood implementation. And that's where I'm looking forward. What is this going to look like if we do finally make our way up that list? And we have these other plans that we're talking about, how those things will intersect. I think that's more of what I'm highlighting, but thank you for clarifying.
You know,
Thanks all for the great questions. Oh, go ahead, Perry. Sorry.
I'll just wrap this up saying that I think that Whatcom County has some advantages. I guess that's not the best word necessarily to use, but our existing program and, you know, the further development of the jail behavioral health and reentry services, the GRACE program connection to that, the LEAD program connection to that, this whole process of fairly close communication and ongoing development, not in silos, but as a collective process, I think is a distinct advantage for Whatcom County when we consider a prosecutorial diversion program, because there's already, if you will, a basis and a you know, a location, if you will, for you know, getting those resources, communicating about individuals that are in high need, etc. And I don't see that as well developed in the other counties with existing PDPs, you know, at this point in time. So again, my thought about sort of the greater piece, and that is all the information that I have for us today.
Well, that's really helpful. Courtney, I'm going to get to you in just a second. I'm going to ask my question before I lose it, because I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. Perry, I remember when you briefed this committee, this is over a year ago, and I think it was as you were kind of kicking off at the request of folks on the task force, right, at a group, that there were kind of three main problems. You've addressed a couple of them. One of them was funding, ongoing funding. Did that constitute a responsibility if counties took on work that really a lot of us, or the county's position at that point was that this is best done by the state. So there was that kind of cash / responsibility, that behavioral health, and then model. Right, it was so brand new that the counties that were taking it on and obviously got some support in creating the model. You gave us some helpful updates today. One, that the model is kind of taking shape and then there's a little bit more clarity to it. Behavioral health providers seeming to get somewhat better, although that's not a for sure thing, and more information. But the proviso information that you shared with us today was a bit troubling, and it sounded like that is the primary funding mechanism for existing programs. That would also be, I'm assuming, the only fund source for a county that wanted to take on something optionally, right, and to provide these services, even if it's not part of the true blood settlement or that particular formal piece. And then today, if I heard you correct, that proviso is in jeopardy, sitting on the governor's desk and is not moving. Did I hear that correctly? And might we want to then, as a committee, bring that to Kayla Schott-Bressler's attention for the task force as a whole to add that to the list. So if I could just clarify that proviso and jeopardy piece, because I think out of the three-legged stool, that was the one piece of information today that wasn't stellar, and maybe that might be a place where we might be of assistance. Could you comment on that? Then we'll go to Courtney's question.
I can, and again, this is a limited area of knowledge for me, but as I understand it in my communication with the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services, their initial plan was to submit a request to the governor's office, which by way of description is different than pursuing proviso funds. So the email that I got back from the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services was that request to the governor's office specifically has not moved forward in legislation thus far. That's as much information as they gave me. But they were looking at a secondary approach to proviso funding, which again, in my limited understanding, is really about approaching the legislature as opposed to the governor's office specifically and saying, we need these funds. This is the funds that, are, of what that's about and so forth. Again, I don't know that the governor's office would necessarily be different, but my thought process was, okay, so proviso funding, and we've certainly used proviso funding in other capacities as far as the Crisis Stabilization Center and Deacon Center for Hope, and et cetera. And it was actually allocated for a 2-year period of time, but again, sustainability and et cetera. So my understanding is those were two different approaches for funding, and that since it had not moved forward in the governor's office at this point, that the Office of Mental Services was going to pursue this other one. And you are right in line with Kayla. She immediately responded to me and said, okay, then we need to take that up, in regard to, communicating with our legislators in terms of supporting that proviso funding, if that is the pathway and route. I guess the other thing that I'll finally say is I definitely have a sense, and others please correct me if I have interpreted this inaccurately, but I definitely have a sense that the state is understanding that they can't build beds to get out of the challenge that comprehensive restoration, that's currently experiencing. They're not going to be able to build enough beds fast enough to be able to provide those services. And so they are essentially farming that out to the counties. The challenge, as you mentioned, Mike, is the counties are saying, wait a minute. This is a state financial responsibility as a county. It's a county problem, but it's a state financial responsibility. And just being hesitant or guarded to use local funding to alleviate this issue, which sort of lets the state off the hook, particularly in relation to, the incoming True Blood funding, and et cetera. So again, I may be sort of like, no, those don't match. That's not how that works, Perry. But that's as much as I've been able to figure out at this point in time. So it's not dead, in my opinion, by any stretch of the imagination. But it has shifted at this point, and I agree with you in terms of supporting that recommendation if that's where the funding is going to come from.
Great, thank you for that, Courtney, and then Under Sheriff Harris, please.
Just a quick comment, and then I swear this is the last time I'll raise my hand, hopefully, but I just wanted to back up to what Perry had said about Grace and Lead. And I want to preface this with their case managers are doing amazing work. Our office loves working with them. This is a comment that is outside of their power and control and goes beyond their role. Most of the referrals with our clients are coming from, to both of their programs, are coming from our office after they have been charged. People are not being diverted in the way that the program is being advertised. That is not frontline staff's fault. We need PDPs. We cannot rely on and think that Grace and Lead is enough. It's not even operating up to what it was intended to do at this point because of staffing issues and other things that are not frontline staff's fault. But I hope that none of us on this call are thinking that everybody that is in Grace or Lead has been diverted and they don't have criminal charges. It is the opposite. And most of those referrals are coming from our office after that chance for diversion has passed, or at least the initial chance.
Courtney, thanks as always for your comment. Under Sheriff Harris, please.
Thank you. This kind of dovetails on what Courtney comment. And again, it's for my own edification. So we're discussing competency restoration. How does that come into play with our mental health court? So our mental health court, I'm assuming, are folks that are deemed competent to stand trial, but they're using an alternative through the mental health court rather than traditional court, versus folks who are deemed not competent to even be in trial and working on getting them out of the system altogether. Is that correct?
Perry, would you take that one?
Sure, if I can, Mike. It just so happens that I'm actually the supervisor for the mental health court, and there are some specific eligibility components for individuals entering the mental health court. And certainly an individual, it's conceivable that an individual that was identified as in need of competency evaluation and restoration could qualify for mental health court. It's more specific than that in regards to the individual's eligibility and, connected to resources, willingness to connect to resources. Because as you know, I'm sure, Under Sheriff Harris, that that program, there is a contingency on the individual being engaged, continuing to be in compliance, et cetera. So, but there are absolutely individuals that are identified and have a serious enough mental illness that they would not be able to effectively function within that kind of, response and resource. And, and I've certainly heard the concern and, and understand the concern that that's not necessarily a diversion program because the individual is involved in the judicial system. And although it may not be, terribly popular, my experience historically and more currently is that the way that mental health court process works is continued wraparound services for the individual, encouragement, something, and you may be familiar, called contingency management, which is reward systems for individuals that are moving forward. And then, additional support, focus, and attention on the individual that may be struggling. And they tend to be very successful with that because it can be scary. I mean, it can be frightening, going out and, taking the steps that are, developed in combination with the mental health court member to what are my goals, what am I going to be able to do? So I think that it is a very effective program, but I also certainly understand, as Courtney and others have shared, that it's like, well, we don't want them in the judicial system at all. And, one of the challenges that I think comes up is individuals that maybe through, the manifestation of their mental health challenges are not, for one reason or another, willing to be engaged or actually accept those services, because again, it's frightening because of their mental health symptomology, is actually a factor within that of not being able to or willing to engage. So I don't know that it's an answer all, and I'm not broad brush stroking this to suggest that everybody should have some kind of leverage, that continues them engagement in the program. But for some individuals, it is actually helpful. And it's amazing. I have the opportunity to step in occasionally to the mental health court, whether I'm covering for the mental health court program manager or what have you, and see these snapshots of individuals that initially were really struggling with that process, but have begun to really get some momentum in terms of their own recovery work and so forth. And the pride that they express, at that point to the other mental health court members, the judicial officer, the team, is truly impressive. But that goes back to, me being one of those clinician types that that lives for that kind of process. So I'll offer that.
I would just comment briefly too, one of our lenses and the entire task force, but especially our behavioral health subcommittee, I think, especially when we think about the SIM model, right? And we think about where along the continuum an individual might be. And while Courtney has a point, it would be wonderful to divert people and intercept zero. or before 1. There's still value, and I think the work of the committee is along any intercept. If we can divert before, other options happen, we're still doing some good. I would just underscore that piece that really all of those are aspects of diversion. They just really are starting at a different intercept level. But back to Courtney's point, I think whenever we can, we want to divert even before they start coming in, which is why the task force adopted formally really looking at intercept 0 and could we be involved in providing some feedback to community and to folks looking and working with youth and diversion programs before people even get in. Perry, if you would please, very briefly, you mentioned that there's you are chairing a group today with mental health providers, and you have a meeting this afternoon. For the good of the folks on the call today, if you wouldn't mind sharing that information for that meeting, if you might get some other takers who might like to join you. I wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing that, and then just offer up if we had any more questions for Mr. Mowry.
Certainly willing to do that. And Under Sheriff Harris, if you'd like, I have a copy of that sequential intercept model that outlines a number of programs and the intercepts that Mr. Parker made reference to. Be more than happy to send that to you if that hasn't come across your desk. I'll make a note to do that. Yes, we have a bi-monthly behavioral health crisis services meeting, and essentially what we do is I'll reach out to entities in the community to showcase their program, the services that they offer, answer questions, etc. We have a number of different entities that are going to provide those more detailed showcasing, if you will, of their programs. And I've also sort of modified this group into starting out the session. It's an hour and a half. It occurs from 1 o'clock to 2:30 today. It is virtual. I will send Jill, with her permission, a copy of the agenda that at the top has the link for the meeting. And so by all means, all are welcome. But as I was mentioning on the agenda at the start of the meeting, I make a very specific request for providers across our community to talk about developments of new programming, challenges that they are facing, whether or not they're able to admit individuals at this point in time into mental health services, that kind of detail, so that all of our providers and the response systems division, if you will, are aware of what's happening, as well as then more general concepts and ideas of, do you have goals in 2024 that would be important for this group, et cetera. So really it's about the behavioral health providers and Whatcom Health and Community Services and other concerned entities being informed of the process that is going on, because so many changes have happened through, as folks know, from 2020 March forward. And I am seeing, I think anyway, a building of resources within our community slowly but surely. But I think that I'm seeing it improve, but then I'm an eternal optimist as well, just in terms of availability of resources, et cetera. I will send that out to Jill. She's always great about forwarding stuff on, and by all means, please, attend if you are interested and or would like to get more information.
Thanks for that, Perry. And I don't see any more questions at this point. So committee members, if something comes up as we enter our next agenda item, we still have the benefit of Mr. Perry today. Thank you again, Perry, for your presentation on that, for catching us up to speed. It sounds like it's still worth talking about the funding piece with Wessler to see if this is something that could use our help or not. Not dead in the water yet, but we are hopeful. And I would just comment, because I think, Perry, you kind of asked in kind of a benign way, but like, are we supportive of this? And I would think anytime, and I would favor Courtney's prescription that we catch them if we can before there's a charge involved. But obviously our community very much needs to divert people who primarily have behavioral health challenges, diagnoses, and really, really difficult lives from our criminal legal system. It's not a spot for treatment. It's really a spot to be able to for offenders, right? And so trying to suss that out. This is very worthwhile work, and we really appreciate not only your stewardship of that group, but updating us, because I think it's absolutely critical. With that, I'll go ahead and move us on to our next agenda item. So, we've been doing this, Dan and I, since we've been leading this committee for a while, which is we want to get some feedback from you all of our priorities for the year and what would we want to cover. I would just kick us off by starting. One of the things that we don't want to do is lose any sight of things that we have been doing. So obviously this group has been particularly interested. Mike Kelly has been kind of helping us along some of that with the 23-hour facility. So as a program like that, it gets stood up. Obviously, we have a vested interest in making sure that it, from both the law enforcement side, from the treatment side, behavioral health provider side, but also the human side, that it is helpful to our community and it meets the needs that we have. So I would say, obviously, we want to keep following that until, especially if there's another subcommittee of the IPRTF. Obviously, we have the jail initiative that is now passed. And I think to whatever extent the behavioral health subcommittee may cross-pollinate with another one. Stephen, I don't know if you're prepared to talk about any thing that was talked about at steering. This group might find that interesting, and that may be an agenda topic, at least to stay in light of. So those initiatives. And then the third I would offer is that, the Children's Fund initiative that was passed last legislative season. I think we may start seeing some of those pieces in there. And there have been many from this group that has advocated for a long time that the task force not only look at adults and what is happening with incarcerated adults, but we also pay special attention, focus, and lend support where we can to youth intervention programs. So with that, those are the things off the top of my head anyways, subcommittee, about items that we want to continue doing. With that, I'll pause, and please popcorn style with items that you see, these either be made new programs, there may be particular issues, there may be challenges or problems that you want to advocate the committee focus on. Brian Estes, we'll start with you.
Yeah, a couple things. I attended a community meeting last year, and Claudia Murphy and Laura Christensen were there. And I just want to make sure that the county has a consistent understanding of the differences between when you should call 988 and 911. And I'll just say at the community meeting, I just think there's some, I would like to have this group have a briefing by the administrators at Volunteers for America about 988, because 20% of the calls to 988 result in a response. And I don't think that was fully appreciated by the presenters I talked about. And so I don't mean to be critical of them at all, but I just think everybody needs to get on the same page, especially that 988, as we've talked about, has specialists that deal specifically with people who speak Spanish, who are LGBTQ, who are veterans, and who are indigenous. And I don't believe that's generally the case when you call 911 when there's a crisis. Secondly, I just think quite broadly, this is beyond our own committee, but I really think it might be a time to kind of take another look at the whole incarceration prevention and reduction task force, how it's, what is our mission? How are we organized? We're going to build a new jail. It just seems like maybe there could be some shifts in emphasis, like you talked about. Maybe this group could be repurposed to focus on prevention a little bit more. And then finally, I think that the group might be well served to have a recurring agenda item related to progress dealing with the mental health facility and mental health funding as we move forward with the new public safety facility in Ferndale. That we have perhaps a role, or at least be kept up to date on that, because I think that would be a important element for this committee to be apprised of or have input on. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Good suggestions, all three of them, as always, Brian. Appreciate that. Dan?
Yeah, I was just listening to Brian and the presentation here this morning. So Mike and Jill and I brought the item forward because we wanted to provide an opportunity to the committee to be generative and its thoughts and its direction moving forward. And what I don't want to do is I don't want this committee to be an information only committee. And by that I mean I don't want to sit here every month and have just presentations. I want us to be generative in the work that we do and the thinking that we provide. And to Brian's point about, you know, we do have a new facility coming online, and we should have a voice in that. And it's not just the jail facility, it's also the 23-hour crisis relief center. And so I'm encouraging this group here at the onset of the beginning of this year to consider, what priorities do you want, and what do you want to do? And you have a platform, you have a voice, and you have a team here that can get things done. So I'm asking you to think about those things. And, you know, maybe it's not at this meeting, maybe it's at the next one or the ones after that. But I want us to be working towards these solutions. And this group, this team has traditionally been the one that's been most generative when it comes to thinking up solutions. And out of this group and others too, you know, Grace was part of that, the lead program, Eric Ritchie's, you know, he was part of that founding that program, alternate response team. We've done a lot, so I just want to encourage us to keep moving forward on that. So, and I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, Dan. I'm going to try and do these in the best order. I believe it's Arlene, Peter, and Heather. So correct me if I'm wrong, but Arlene, please.
Arlene, you're
Still be
muted.
muted, Arlene, I think.
Yes, it's very important to me that this committee provides oversight, especially on the planning for the clinic. It's one of the most important things that we're ever going to do. And it works on the preventative end, which is very important. The source of the problem, the source of all our social problems is individual problems, and they can walk in the door and get evaluated. So I think we should see to it that we create a very effective program in the clinic, the crisis clinic. I think it's important for us to provide money sources. That's not my expertise. My expertise is in counseling. And before this time of retirement, which is not really retirement, I worked at the a crisis respite program for quite a few years. And now I'm working at the Touchstone Clinic, providing training for counselors. So my 45 years of experience is going into young people. And I'm very excited about that too.
Arlene, as always, really appreciate your input, your perspective, and the lens you bring. And just to clarify, when you speak clinic and having kind of our fingers on the pulse of that clinic and recommendations, you're referring to the 23-hour center where folks can come in. Thank you for that clarification. And thank you again for your comment, Peter, and then Heather.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's see. I feel like I'd like to just recommend as an add-on to what Dan was saying, a bias towards action on this committee as we move forward. The county has made some significant promises, intentions, in the last year with the implementation plan. A lot of great work was done there. I need to see that all of those intentions, promises, make great progress over the next year or two. And I think that this committee is an important one for making sure that those things happen. And when we see things slipping behind, not happening, or poor implementation, I think it's on us to bring that up. As a point, I was reading, of course, our the materials in our packet. I'm concerned that the Ann Deacon Center for Hope, the participation rates, I'm not sure exactly if that's the right term, but we're 80% on one side, 64 on the other. I mean, I don't understand. I want to understand better why that is and why we're not in these critical times, not operating 100% or 120. So 80 and 64, that's not enough. Sure, there's great reasons for it. I want to know more. I want to see the facilities that we have, the programs we have operating at their best, to their best ability. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Peter, rarely do I feel like I need to comment on somebody's comment, but optimization of current resources is really smart and is kind of low-hanging fruit, and it's definitely something that we could put a little focus on. And certainly, inviting that input, but also then sharing, goals of the committee. Heather, please, and then Courtney.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. So I was just reflecting on the 2021 letter that this committee wrote regarding ARPA priorities. I want to refresh us on those because I think they're still quite relevant, and also some celebration because the 24/7 mental health urgent care was number 3, and that has been significantly acted upon. So thank you to everybody, the county and Arlene especially. I always want to shout out Arlene for that leadership and vision. But those priorities in 2021 it's now 2024 and they're still so relevant. And I'm happy to send this back out if you all want a refresher. But we said the behavioral health workforce, right? Supporting that, especially the community-based providers. And I think that's super aligned with a lot of the comments people are making today about making sure we know the difference between 988 and 911 and optimizing the current resources and understanding if they're really effective in the ways we had intended, but also growing that workforce and what's our role and ability there. The pretrial and reentry support was another priority. Supported in transitional housing and that recovery piece, and then data and really having meaningful data that we can understand and act upon, and support for youth mental health and the just lack of services there for youth, knowing that that's the pipeline often that so many of our people that we're taking care of had issues in foster care or in junior high that weren't diverted in ways that could have set a different trajectory for that person's life. The other thing I'd add though is I heard things today that I'm kind of alarmed by, and I like who is responsible for fixing them, and can we talk about that? Like that formulary issue, that I might be naive. I know I'm not in government, but that seems like who's in charge of the formulary at the Whatcom County Jail? Can they call the Western State Hospital formulary person and say, let's make sure we have the same medications available? And then connected to the fact that my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm telling people of this fact, nearly $3 million or about $3 million of the behavioral health fund is spent on medication in our jail. Right? Like that, I'm pretty sure that's stated in the jail implementation plan that came out with that ballot measure. And that's part of that Medicaid waiver that we're pursuing, right? But that behavioral health fund, $3 million out into the community for the workforce and community-based services would be significant and transformational. And the fact that it goes to medication in the jail, like what are we doing about that? And how can we support Medicaid continuing to pay for those? And then that formulary issue. Courtney, you have such incredible insight about like if Grace and Lead are not working in the ways that they were intended to, what's our committee's opportunity to support that and actually have true diversion versus diversion post charges that doesn't really make sense or help anybody. And then in terms of that youth mental health piece, I think it would be really interesting to have a joint presentation from some different school systems and the juvenile justice system and understanding disciplinary rates and just what's the lay of the land there. And because my last look, there's some significant racial disparities around discipline rates and suspensions. And is there something that we can do as a committee to support different kinds of diversion across the county for youth too?
Heather, really appreciate those comments and appreciate you kind of holding that accountability from 21 and carrying that forward. I think that's really helpful as kind of a milepost. Courtney, with you, and just to remind committee members, we are close to time. So Courtney, go ahead, please.
I'll make it quick. I'll just say, can I just endorse everything Heather said? Just everything Heather said, repeated. And I think that there's a lot of things that we don't know about each other and the work that we're doing. And, some of the things that I said that I was under the impression everybody in this committee was aware of. Our office has been talking quite a bit about issues for a while with prescribing meds in the jail and staff availability, et cetera. But where I'm going with this is there's so much in this system, these systems that we've created. There's so much that we don't know. I think my feedback, kind of tying the bow on this here would be, and going into the new year, is that I would like to see more client facing staff that are on this committee, because as far as I'm aware, I think I might be the only one. And that's kind of an issue. I have the luxury and privilege of having a job that allows me to participate. Not every client-facing person is going to have that flexibility, but if we could get some more client-facing folks on this task force, I think there's a lot that we will learn about the systems that we're trying to fix. That it is no offense to anybody at a different level in the hierarchy. You're just, once you get to admin, you're looking down, zoomed out, and you lose sight of the specifics, just like people at the front lines might lose sight of the greater picture that admin has at the top. So if we can balance this task force and make it a little less admin heavy, I think there will be a lot that we can learn about our efforts made so far and where we want to go. And then just everything Heather said, I think, sorry, please ignore the noise in the background. I think that I'm not from Bellingham. I've been here since 2012. I have a lot of love in my heart for Whatcom, and I mean this with the best of intention. We are very good at patting ourselves on the back and losing sight of that call to action. And we have got to keep that at the forefront. We have got to keep ourselves zoomed in on intercept zero, because for everybody else that's caught in this system, it doesn't matter if they're caught to them, if they're caught later at caught is a poor choice of words, but at intercept 4 or 5, it is their lives that are being torn apart and further dismantled than they might have already been, with charges that they may not have needed to exist in the first place. And it's a luxury for us to sit back and say, oh, well, we'll get them at number 2 or 3. We can't do that. We have to stop patting ourselves on the back, but we can also acknowledge the great work we've done. There's a lot more to do, and we've done great work so far. And I think everybody on this call should be proud of themselves while also keeping in mind the work that we still need to do. Thank you.
Well, you've heard it from our membership. Pedal to the metal. We got a sense of urgency. I think it's really key. I invite members as we close out, we can bring items the next time. Co-chair Dan Hamill and myself will chat about these and other ones. And I wanted to exhort, and Courtney almost read my mind. I was going to bring up membership. So another piece of doing things equitably is making sure that some of the people at the table need to be there. And Courtney was talking a little bit about our membership. I agree with her charge and think it would be valuable. I solicit and invite members who have suggestions of folks that might round out our behavioral subcommittee. Please bring those names forth. And second, I would have, just looking around the room at what I can see and based on what we've shared about our identities, we're pretty white. And it would be great if we could do some really, really intentional solicitation and recruitment of folks with some differing perspectives. And I would just, Courtney, you kicked it off great. It'd be great to have some frontline folks. I think the perspective you bring and the niche issues you bring are unique and they're extremely important. But I would also add, I'd like to round out at least, our representation by kind of our background would be really, really helpful. Thank you all for staying with us. We're a little bit over time. Again, if you have additional ideas for topics for this year, like I said, Dan and I will be reviewing those. Feel free to send those in the meantime. And please do make it, if you can, to the meeting of the whole. We'll hear from Kayla Shoppressler and we can take some of our things that we learned today from Perry and questions. Thank you all. And with that, Jill, do we have anybody for public comment? As I almost adjourn the meeting without checking public comment. Jill, do we have
Thank you,
anybody?
Mike. We don't have any attendees remotely today. Peter, can you confirm it? Are you the only one in the room there? Or are there other attendees?
I'm the only one in the room.
Okay, so no public comment today. Thank you.
All right. With that, we're adjourned. Thanks for your attendance, your input today.